if you think that there's a creator who's made you specially and who watches over you and supervises you, and cares about you and wants you to do well and even wants you to survive death, I have to say, I think it's a preposterous proposition, because I have to be honest, and an irrational one, and a fatuous one, and a sinister one, because the idea of wanting a father who never dies and won't quit is infantilizing. But suppose you did think that, shouldn't it make you happy? It doesn't make them happy. It doesn't make them better at all. They won't be happy till I believe it too. So the first principle is, separate that. Keep it to yourselves. Go to any church you like. Build any church you want. Do it with your own money. Don't ask the government to teach this stuff to my children in a government school. We won't have that. And surely, in other words, I don't, when I'm offended by a filthy article I read about atheists and Jews and secularists, I have to, bombardments of stuff of this kind comes at me all the time. I don't go out and burn down the nearest mosque because I've been offended, do I? Don't be ridiculous. But I'm supposed to respect those who do such things. I'm supposed to treat them with an extra delicacy. Why should I be doing that? Who's the offended one here, really? I'm not going to make a big point about my feelings being hurt. I have a thick skin, I have a broad back, I've studied Socrates, I think the Socratic method's more convincing. But you act as if I'm the one who's offending them by saying, I find your beliefs actually rather unconvincing. And in any case, I'm not going to have them forced on me. Now, is that finally clear? Is it? I hope so. Good.
How are we to make sense of this, right? The sense of our status as moral beings that have these two aspects, as it were, that reaching out to value, but on the other hand seem in ways conflicted. Now, if you like, this seeks for a kind of anthropology, an account of what it is to be human. And I think we stand in need of a philosophical account, if you like, or an ethical account of what it is to be human, such that we can fill in things like the Golden Rule, so we know who falls within the scope of that. Now, I think that when we look around for such, the richest understanding of that comes from religious directions. That's the claim. It's not meant to be a deduction strictly of that. It's meant to be a question, if you like, of what provides the best account or explanation. And in the meantime, it also stands as a challenge to secular accounts that simply would treat these things as freestanding, as if they simply arise without explanation.
But you're making a mystery where none exists. I mean, if you make the assumption, that we are members of an evolved higher primate species, and then you look at us and think, why do they have wars? Why do they have sexual jealousy? Why do they have rape? You understand already. There's no mystery about it. Yeah. But also, why do they have families? Why do they have emotions? Why do they care for their children? Same question is asked about chimpanzees and dolphins. There isn't a mystery. You're creating one where none exists. You're piling on supererogatory assumptions. But I was very glad to see you make the concession earlier that there isn't any necessary connection between faith and morality. I think that's a rather larger concession than I expected so soon from you, sir.
Well, that's why I've been fast. But look, the question is not whether or not we can't find sort of social pressures and features that have adaptive utility and so on that might contour certain patterns of human behavior. The question that's more interesting is our capacity to engage in the reflective questioning of those habits, those inclinations, and so on. So we might say that, look, we found that certain sort of thing has benefited us over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia. The question is, ought we to behave in that way? And the idea that certain things have just benefited, it doesn't, in and of itself, answer the question as to whether or not this is a good and noble and decent way to live. And it's that question, which I think is a pressing question which we feel, beyond, as it were, what nature has forced upon us. There's the question, how ought we to live? And that's a question that only moral beings can ask. And by moral beings, I mean beings that are not simply determined by those evolutionary and historical pressures.
I wouldn't say determined, but shall we at least say conditioned. And, by the way, not created. You talk as if we have a responsibility to a higher being, which we don't. When you say, since mammals do behave in this way, which you agree, that's the is bit, then of course we can ask, ought they to? But isn't it, once you've made my assumption, a slightly odd question?
But look, it's our capacity.
Will they, what about a question like this? Do you think they will go on, we, our species, will go on making war torturing each other, killing each other, raping each other, dissing each other and so on. I think you can probably, as a believer in original sin, I presume,
yes.
make the assumption that they will. But I, without original sin, can tell you that will happen.
Yeah. And the question, I suppose, would be why. But look, the point is, it's just that ability.
There's no why, there's no mystery.
But it is precisely that ability to reflect upon our condition that reveals us to be moral beings that transcend that mere evolutionary history. But look, that's going to be the point of contention.
Also, we're usurping sheriff's...
That's true.
Sorry.
In fact, yeah. The next question was for you, Mr. Hitchens.
Goody.
It's a clarification from some of your writings. So you've written that civil rights reformers like Martin Luther King were, despite appearances, not really religious, but secular. And that certain murderous tyrants like Stalin were, again, despite appearances, not secular, but religious. So what do you mean by that? And why isn't it just a case of calling anything you dislike religious and anything you like secular?
Right. Anyone who's read Dr. Martin Luther King's speeches, or indeed his doctoral thesis, will know that he was a rather complicated Hegelian, that he, of course, didn't believe in the Exodus story, though that was the text he took, because the only place you could make a public speech if you were a black man in the South at that time was from the pulpit, and it was the only book everyone knew. But a moment's thought will tell you that the Exodus story would have entitled his oppressed tribe to kill and dispossess anyone else who got in their way. That's why we don't have any Amalekite problem anymore, or Moabite or Jebusite problem anymore. And in fact, Dr. King, fortunately for us, obviously didn't believe the Exodus story. He believed to the contrary, and a good thing too. So that's the first thing. And the American Anti-Slavery Society, when it was first begun, was decorated by wonderful non-believers like Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin, and it took the Christians, and even then, several more decades to catch up, to undo some of the harm that the Christian authority and warrant for slavery had done. And even then it went on in the South under the same warrant of the biblical separation of the races, that the motto of the Confederacy, Deo Vindice, by the way, is the motto of the Confederacy, God on our side. The same slogan that appears in German on the belt buckle of every Nazi soldier, and the same words that appear in the oath everyone had to take to Hitler, I swear in the name of God, for the Führer. All of that can't be described, I think, as secular. With the Joseph Stalin question, I'll have to take just 30 seconds. It's a little more complicated. If you become the head of a Russian state that for several thousand years of serfdom and slavery and Jew baiting and war and feudalism has taught millions and millions of peasants that the head of the state is somewhere a little above the throne, a little below heaven, something supernatural. If you don't take advantage of that, you really shouldn't be in the dictatorship business. He had a ready-made audience of credulous believers. And what did he produce for them? An inquisition, a really ingenious inquisition, one of the greatest heresy hunts in history, miraculous harvests, all flowing from the dear leader, the biology of Lysenko. You can fill in the rest for yourself. And always at his side, invariably at his side, the Russian Orthodox Church, which to this day produces icons, painted ones, beautiful ones in some ways, ugly in others, showing his face with a halo around it. He never ever repudiated the allegiance of, or was repudiated by, the Orthodox Church of his country. If you want to call this secular, you're entitled. But don't try it again when I'm here.
Then one more question, and then we'll go to audience questions.
So the claim I'd want to make is this, that intolerance is not a consequence of a belief in truth, a truth to be discovered. Intolerance is as equally, it can arise from people who have that view, but that's a mistake. And it's equally and increasingly more commonly to be discovered on the part of people who have no regard for truth.
You appear to say that because if you had said that someone is more inclined to be tolerant if they possessed absolute truth, you would obviously have uttered a nonsense.
No, I wasn't saying that.
Because people who think they have the absolute truth, believe me, you don't need me to tell you, are capable of anything, including tremendous lying.
Yeah, but there's no point in repeating the thing I didn't say, right?
Instead of saying that, you seem to say that there exists somewhere a Platonic absolute truth, but it can't be attained by us, though we keep looking. How's that different from relativism?
Well, because first of all, I didn't say Platonic, but what
I'm saying
the idea.
You don't say. Well, then you, just to be sure, you don't say anyone has absolute truth or access to it, do you?
No, what I'm saying is this: the question was whether or not people who take a view about truth, let us say, or absolutism and so on, are intolerant in certain ways. And my claim was this: that in fact, a belief in objective truth, combined with two.
No, sorry.
Well, you can have. All right, we'll have absolute in there. All right, a belief in absolute.
You can't climb down that fast.
That's fine. No, by absolute I mean non-relative truth. There really is some fact to the matter. That fact is not conditioned by or dependent upon human opinion. With regard to some matter, there is a truth that is autonomous and independent of us, and is as is, thus and so. Right. So absolute in that respect. Now, my point was this: that a person who believes in that, combined with two further thoughts common in the traditions. One is that we are interested in that, and that human inquiry is directed towards the discovery of that. Science is one example, ethics is another. There are lots of them, right? Areas in which we seek out truth of that kind. A person who believes in truth, believes in the value of seeking truth, and recognizes human fallibility in that effort, has a foundation for a kind of toleration in recognizing in fellow human beings, fellow seekers, respecting also the fact that they too are subject to the burdens that we are subject to in our efforts to try to understand and discover these matters, and that produces a kind of fellowship of common shared human understanding. Take away the notion of absolute truth, and all you have, as it were, is a fashion of the moment as to where it is that things tend to go at any given moment.
All right, well, look, I'd now be usurping as we would, the right of the audience to ask a question, but I'll just have to leave you with this. I mean, are you saying we'll know absolute truth when we find it? And I could make a statement of objective truth easily enough, and so can you. But can you make a statement of absolute truth while we wait to find what it is?
Well,
how is that different from a relativistic, skeptical, open conversation?
Well, look, open conversation, skepticism, and relativism are three different things.
No,
but with regard to the question,
they're a trinity that partakes of one another.
I hope not. If the condition of the possibility of an open conversation is you be a relativist or a skeptic, then that seems to me a mistake. But look, the point was simply this: that if you say, so give us an example of something that might be an absolute truth, then I do think, and maybe we share this actually, but on a different foundation, that something like human life, innocent human life, is something to be respected and not violated. Right? That seems to me to be the product.
That's a precept, not a truth.
Well, I'm not sure what you're taking that difference to be.
Well, innocent humans die in their millions every year for no reason than that they're born to a primate species on a very harsh planet.
Well, that's a description.
We can't say we dislike that.
No, that's a description of what might happen.
Well, we can say
mine was a claim about
precept.
what we ought or ought not to do. But look, I mean,
that is not a statement. What you just made is in no sense a truth statement.
Well, others can judge that as well.
No sense a truth statement.